Welcome back to Alyssa's Movie Takes. We are done with season 3, episode 2. Some of you might have seen it in theaters, watched it again when it came out last night on streaming. And what I want to hit on today is the same thing as last time, a scene or a moment between the characters that stood out to me and I want to talk about the themes with. So this time it's Simon and Eden's relationship. Now we've seen this relationship before in the series, and they're married and they've had some tumultuous moments. They've had some beautiful romantic moments. In particular, I love the moment for them when they're in the wine press in season 1, episode 5, the wedding episode where Simon is explaining this new calling and she's just so happy for him to become the man that she knew he was all along. Right, so we saw that was very romantic. They're just kind of dancing in the wine press. Now it's somewhat implied at the end of the scene that they do sleep together. I mean, there's sort of do the movie thing where they cut away and then they sort of zoom in on something. In this case, it was the wine coming out of the press, but they used to do that in movies when kissing was censored more than 3 seconds. They would just have a train going through a tunnel, or they'd have the curtains blowing, or they'd do something that was to imply like these characters have slept with each other. Now in this episode 2 of season 3, they're not so subtle, right? So they kind of joked around with it last time, which I'm not sure was great. To me, it was sort of awkward. Like they would have given them time. They were separated for months. These disciples would have given them some time alone before they came barging into their house. But anyway, this episode, it's clear that they're able to have some time alone and come back together as husband and wife, which I appreciate them showing. Obviously they don't show that scene, but they show the immediate aftermath, and they're cuddling and they're loving each other, and you can clearly see that they've had passion in their marriage. And so I just wanted to dive in and ask the question, what does the Bible teach us about sex? And in this first part, I'm going to talk about the beautiful things, the good promises that God has for marriage and for sex. And that comes from basically the very beginning. We see that in Genesis, where even before the fall, the Lord tells Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. And at that point, there was no such thing as clothing. And as far as we know, although we don't know for sure, they were the only two people on the earth. And so they got to enjoy some marital bliss with each other. And we do know that eventually, they were fruitful and they did multiply and they did fill the earth, because here we are, 8 billion, we just reached that mile mark, people later. So Adam and Eve is sort of the first part where we see that this is something that God made, that it's good, that it is a wonderful thing between a husband and a wife. And I think another place where you see that, at least this is my interpretation, and I'm fairly confident in it, is Song of Solomon. Some people think Song of Solomon is a metaphor, and I like to think of it pretty much straight up. It's basically talking about the goods, the beauty of marital bliss and coming together as husband and wife, making love, etc. So I see the first 4 chapters as an engaged couple who are about to get married, and all they can think about is each other. And especially with the guy, all that he can think about is his future wife's body. Like whenever he's talking, it's just about how she looks or what he's thinking about, like what's going through his mind. Now, mind you, there are some very strange metaphors that he compares her to. You can kind of point out those if you know them in the comments below. But he makes some, he's basically just focused on her, and his head is filled with her body and his desire for her and her desire for him. And then you get to the end of chapter 4, and you can read it, but it seems pretty clear what happens. At the end of chapter 4, they get married and they get to sleep with each other. And then the next 4 chapters, the guy who has said very little up to that point suddenly starts to talk a lot. And you can kind of see that he's just enjoying his wife. And that's basically how I'll say it. He's enjoying his wife. So there's some pretty explicit stuff in the Bible, especially in Song of Solomon, but there's a lot of love stories in the Bible too. I mean, there's Ruth and Boaz, there's Mary and Joseph. And here in The Chosen, they give us Simon and Eden. So one of the things that I remember reading in the Jesus Storybook Bible, which is a children's book, is how God gives us the rules, not because he hates us or because he thinks, I just want to punish them, but because he knows what's best for us. And I think that's the case when you're talking about marital love and marital bliss, that this is the thing that God gives us as a gift, a wedding gift, essentially. Like I heard one pastor say that sex is God's wedding gift to you. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, those 2 stories I mentioned, Adam and Eve, and then also Song of Solomon, you see that it's designed to bring oneness. It's designed to bring pleasure and enjoyment and bind you together as husband and wife. And then in the New Testament, Jesus talks about marriage, that he says, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now, that is, he's quoting the Old Testament there, but he's essentially saying, like, marriage is this good thing that I created, and it brings you together as one flesh. And not only Jesus in the New Testament talks about kind of the rules for engagement, and that's why I want you to think about it, right? The rules for engagement. Paul says that when a husband and wife separate for a while, it's good for them to come back together again, because sex is a big part of marriage. And without it, there can be a lot of frustration, there can be a lot of discouragement, you can start being tempted to look elsewhere. So it's an important part of marriage. And I'm so glad that The Chosen has decided to include this, right? That it's not just, oh, well, it's implied, but they really almost do show like this was an important part for Simon and Eden. And of course it would be, because they had been separated for months. And especially Simon, you can tell just how much he's desiring Eden when he comes home. And it just allows us to go deeper into their relationship, knowing that this is a part of their dynamic as a married couple and part of what they would have to work through with Simon in ministry. So in the next part, this is the chosen and good sex in the Bible. And the next time I'm going to talk about the chosen and bad sex in the Bible. And what I mean by that is moments where people screwed up and made choices that were not good and had long-term consequences, or where characters had things happen to them that were not their fault and what happened as a result of that. Now they cover that in The Chosen 2 in the last season. So I'm going to take a look at that as well. So if you want to get a teaser to that, you can watch this video as well as my discussion about episode 5 from season 2 that I'm probably going to hit a little bit again in the next video about Mary's journey. But that's my take on The Chosen season 3 episode 2, particularly with the relationship between Simon and Eden. And I hope to talk to you soon.